Just welcome everyone to our first session of our Bible study on the book of Lamentations. And I want to say welcome to Shani and Mary, and glad you guys are here. Just to let you know and let everyone else know, we do record the session, do a video and audio recording that I then post on YouTube after the session. So if you, for people who aren't able to be a part of it, so if you don't want to, it's not the highest quality video, and really they only can really see my face. But if you don't want to have your face on YouTube, we get about 27 views.
You can say that 10,000 followers.
Throughout time, and some of that is me making sure that it's up there working right. But just so you know, it's not live. There's no comments available, things like that on it. But if you wanted to go back and listen to something again, there will you can do that. We'll send you an email with a link to the YouTube channel for the Bible study as well. Or if you're not able to come a week here in June, you can catch up on what you missed by going to YouTube.
Or you show up really late and you can catch up on what you missed.
There you go.
That happened to us in a snowstorm last year.
Yeah. So we do our best to try to be done by 1 or shortly after. But if you need to leave, you feel free to go ahead and leave on when you need to for that. And then, of course, there's coffee and water and some cookies and chips or nuts available. But if you also want to bring your lunch, please feel free to do that. If you did use a coffee cup or a plate, just put everything in that gray tub over there by the coffee afterwards, and we'll get that cleaned up. Everyone has a name tag so that we can know each other's names. After the class, just encourage you to put your name tags in the basket on the table, and they'll be ready for you next week. If you wear it home, then someone might help someone at home remember your name too. But just bring it back next week if you forget and wear it home. Just trying to make sure I have all of my announcements done because I didn't write them down. But I think that's good for now. So we might have 1 or 2 more people coming, Jay and Jane Hall, but later. But we're gonna go ahead and get started. And as I always like to start with Bible studies, we'll start each week in a moment of prayer, and then we'll get going. And this will be a little bit of just to let everyone know, a little bit of a different class. A lot of times we go through a passage and really dissect it, and we're not going to do that per se here. We're gonna read some of the book, and then we're gonna today particularly we'll explore some other questions in what we encounter that will help us engage this unique and powerful book of the Bible in hopefully meaningful ways. So, but let's start with a moment of prayer. Wonderful God, I'm so grateful for this day and for this time that we have to come together and to be in your presence and with one another to study your word. As we come to the book of Lamentations today and in the coming weeks, and as we hear these powerful and sometimes unsettling words, we pray that you will give us wisdom, that you will open our hearts and our minds to what you want to speak to us and what we need to hear and share today. We pray this in your name, O Lord. Amen. All right. So today I want to start by just reading the first chapter to you out loud. Okay, so feel free to follow along in your Bible, or if you just want to listen, but listen to this. I'm reading from the New Revised Standard Version, so if you have a different version, the words might be different. Just keep track of that. So we're in the book of Lamentations, chapter 1, and I'm just going to read chapter 1 to us and just get started here with it, okay? So here we go. How lonely sits the city that once was full of people. How like a widow she has become. She that was great among the nations, she that was a princess among the provinces, has become a vassal. She weeps bitterly in the night, with tears on her cheeks. Among all her lovers, she has no one to comfort her. All her friends have dealt treacherously with her. They have become her enemies. Judah has gone into exile with suffering and hard servitude. She lives now among the nations and finds no resting place. Her pursuers have all overtaken her in the midst of her distress. The roads of Zion mourn, for no one comes to the festivals. All her gates are desolate. Her priests groan. Her young girls grieve, and her lot is bitter. Her foes have become the masters. Her enemies prosper because the Lord has made her suffer for the multitude of her transgressions. Her children have gone away captives before the foe. From daughter Zion has departed all her majesty. Her princes have become like stags, and they find no pasture. They fled without strength before the pursuer. Jerusalem remembers in the days of her affliction and wandering, and all the precious things that were hers in days of old, when her people fell into the hand of the foe, and there was no one to help her. The foe looked on, mocking over her downfall. Jerusalem sinned grievously, so she has become a mockery. All who honored her despise her, for they have seen her nakedness, and she herself groans and turns her face away. Her uncleanliness was in her skirts. She took no thought of her future. Her downfall was appalling, with none to comfort her. O Lord, look at my affliction, for the enemy has triumphed. Enemies have stretched out their hands over all her precious things. She has even seen the nations invade her sanctuary, those whom she forbade to enter her congregation. All her people groan as they search for bread. They trade their treasures for food to revive their strength. Look, O Lord, and see how worthless I have become. Is it nothing to you, all who pass by? Look and see if there is any sorrow like my sorrow, which has brought upon me, which the Lord inflicted on the day of his fierce anger. From on high he sent fire. It went deep into my bones. He spread a net for my feet. He turned me back. He has left me stunned, fainted all day long. My transgressions were bound into a yoke. By his hand they were fastened together. They weigh on my neck, sapping my strength. The Lord handed me over to those whom I cannot withstand. The Lord has rejected all my warriors in the midst of me. He proclaimed a time against me to crush my young men. The Lord has trodden as in a winepress the virgin daughter of Judah. For these things I weep. My eyes flow with tears, for a comforter is far from me, one to revive my courage. My children are desolate, for the enemy has prevailed. Zion stretches out her hands, but there is no one to comfort her. The Lord has commanded against Jacob that his neighbors should become his foe. Jerusalem has become a filthy thing among them. The Lord is in the right, for I have rebelled against his word. But hear, all you peoples, and behold my suffering. My young women and my young men have gone into captivity. I called to my lovers, but they deceived me. My priests and my elders perished in the city while seeking food to revive their strength. See, O Lord, how distressed I am. My stomach churns. My heart is wrung within me because I have been very rebellious. In the street, the sword bereaves. In the house, it is like death. They heard how I was groaning, with no one to comfort me. All my enemies heard of my trouble. They are glad that you have done it. Bring on the day you have announced, and let them be as I am. How many of you have read the book of Lamentations before? Well, you've read everything. Just Kathy?
Donna did too.
Donna? Yeah. It's not a book we often read from. It's not a book we often preach from. As a preacher, I can't think of a time that Lamentations is in the lectionary preaching cycle. And I've not preached from it in my 22 years of preaching. I cannot recall. Maybe there's a time, I won't do that early on, but I can't recall a time that I based an entire sermon off of a passage of Lamentations.
It would be too depressing. The first time I heard about this, the book of Lamentations.
Yeah. Was what I just read pleasant to read, to hear?
Not really.
No. It's not what we often picture, is it? Or what we necessarily want to hear, right? What would you describe what you just heard, what we just read in Lamentations 1?
Describing the fall of the nation of Israel, primarily. I mean,
Actually, it's a little bit more specific than that, but yeah, yeah, it's a fall. It's describing a fall of it describes the fall of the city of Jerusalem and the temple. But we're going to get into that too. But generally, what would you describe that as? What comes to mind? What is this?
As
As
a woman, just reading this and just not knowing with what he said, I would look at it as a woman who's feeling alone, abandoned. Her body is not with what it used to be. Also, the sorrow or the sadness that it brings to her, but with what she once was and what she is now. That's just the start of it.
Yeah.
Deep mourning, emotion, almost like a journal, like reading somebody's journal.
Yeah. So this is a lament, and laments are passionate expressions of grief, pain, loss, suffering. And most often, laments or lamentations are often poetry. They're often songs, but they're a highly charged expression of grief. And John is right, and we're going to go over some history here of what caused that grief. But this is a poem of or an expression. It could have been a song. We don't know. This originally was written in ancient Hebrew. I couldn't tell you if that was more lyrical than. But I think this was probably some kind of poem written to express what people were feeling, what survivors were feeling. And my guess, just from to share, my guess is very similar to what Shani described. I think this was probably a woman writing this, who wrote this poem for us, which leads me into sharing. We have no idea who wrote the book of Lamentations. It's often attributed to the prophet Jeremiah, who is a prophet who is working in at the time who is prophesying in the book of Jeremiah takes place before and during and after not only the fall of the nation of Judah, but also of Jerusalem and the temple. And Jeremiah in the book right before it, the prophet Jeremiah, he preaches lament as well. He often, some of his prophecies are lamentations. But there is no reason to believe that Jeremiah or a single person wrote all of these poems that we're going to be hearing in the next few weeks. And the only thing we could really say is that they're written from a survivor, someone who survived this, someone who witnessed this, someone who experienced this. And I hear when I read this first one, I hear a woman's voice. And just the description of Jerusalem as the city, it has that. So I think that's an important thing to keep in mind, that these things that we're going to hear from come to us from unique people who went through something really significant. So, and who had, by rights, a good reason to lament. So I want to share, just help us to understand this and how we might best engage this book here for us in studying. Share some history, and to ask, how familiar are we with ancient Jewish history? Of the Kingdom of Israel. Okay. All right. So I will do a crash course here. It will help set us up everything. So I'll go back to kind of the beginning, which is back to Abraham, or actually way back into the book of Genesis. This guy who's living off in what would be present-day Iran and Iraq, by the Babylonian River, in a city-state called this guy named Abram, who at this time had no children, was married, but was getting kind of old. He wasn't really old yet, but he was getting kind of old. And one day, for whatever reason, God calls out to him. And Abram hears God's voice, and God tells Abram to leave his home, leave the place that he grew up in, leave his family, his father's family, his household, and go to the land that God would show him, would lead him on a journey. And so Abram took his wife Sarai, and they left They left with all of, they left her with their camels and their sheep and their, it wasn't just Abram and Sarah walking through the desert. Abram was a wealthy man, and the two of them, but both were, in their probably at the times late 60s, early 70s, and they set out on this journey that with their nephew and his family. His nephew was Lot, whose name was Lot. Went with Abraham, and they went east, and so they crossed over into the west coast of the Mediterranean, and between the sea and a river called the Jordan River, God said, "This is your land. This is your promised land." Flowing with milk and honey, and if you, Abram, continue to do what I tell you to do, I will make you a great nation. I will make your descendants number beyond the stars in the sky and the sand upon the seashore, and all people will be blessed through you. That is kind of the great covenant of God with Abram, or as we know him, because he doesn't always listen to God, and misadventures happen, and he ends up in Egypt and has to change his name from Abram to Abraham, and Sarai changes her name from Sarai to Sarah, and we're more familiar with Abraham and Sarah, and they go through a lot of stories, but God promises them, Abraham, this area of land between the Mediterranean and the Jordan River, and this area as the promised land. This is the place that I'm sending you, a land flowing with milk and honey, and there you will be a great nation. Well, Abraham has a son. His son has two sons. Isaac is Abraham's son. Isaac has a son named Esau, and Jacob has 12 sons and a girl. And through a lot of other misadventures of people not always doing good things, Jacob and his descendants become the inheritors of this promised land. They end up, because of a famine, end up down in Egypt for a long time, where they become slaves. And then God delivers them out of Egypt with Moses, and they lead them through to the desert, back to the promised land that none of them knew. They knew that they were descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They knew that they told each other the stories that God had promised us this land, and we would be a great nation, and we'll have more descendants than the skies and the stars, and we are a blessing to all people. We are God's chosen people. And along the way, we get the 10 Commandments, and we get a new understanding of the covenant, of what it means to do what God wants us to do, and this or that. And then they come back, finally, to this land between the Mediterranean and the Jordan River that God had promised Abram. And they reclaim it. They conquer it. They drive out some of the other people that are there. And it's also why, to this day, there is still conflict in Israel. Okay? It goes back to this biblical story, the tension and the hatred and the violence between what we know as ancient as Palestine and Israel have existed for as long as humanity has existed. And they slowly, over time, as they have settled this and conquered this, they become a nation. They become a kingdom. They actually, the whole story of David, of David and Goliath, and David, they become a king like other kings. Before, they had a king. God was the king of the people of Israel, and they were called Israel because Jacob, who did a lot of not good things, had to change his name from Jacob to Israel because he wrestled with God, and so they called themselves the descendants of Jacob. They were all from the tribes of Jacob's children, and they were the people of Israel, Jacob's people, Israel's people. And so they became the kingdom, the nation of Israel. And for a good chunk of time, they were a regional superpower. They did quite well. They were able to have a good kingdom. They had good armies. They were made alliances. They made socioeconomic things, and they understood this as God's. They were God's people, the kingdom, God's kingdom. They were God's chosen people because God chose them to be there. This was a promise, and things were good. I mean, they had trouble. They were enemies. Sometimes Egypt would come up and say, "Hey, we want you guys back," and this and that. But then, they did okay. Well, until they couldn't get along with each other, and they had a civil war, and they broke into two kingdoms. There was one time from the southern part, they basically stretched from the southern end of the Mediterranean Sea up to the northern end of the Mediterranean Sea, and along there they were pretty large, and they broke into two: a northern kingdom and a southern kingdom. The northern kingdom kept the name Israel, and the southern kingdom took the name Judah. Okay, this is an important thing to remember, that the southern kingdom took the name Judah. They were called Judah because one of Jacob's / Israel's sons was named Judah, and the tribesmen, the descendants of Judah, had settled in that southern region. Also in that southern region was the city of Jerusalem. It's also Bethlehem, which are important cities in Christianity, were located in that region. So they took the name Judah because they were primarily the descendants of Judah in that area. Now Jerusalem was significant. It was the capital city of when it was one kingdom. The capital was Jerusalem. When it became the northern kingdom, the capital moved to a place that we know as Samaria, which is important in Christian teaching later on. But the capital city in Judea was Jerusalem, and Jerusalem housed the temple that the people built to be a place that they would worship. It was a place that they built a special place inside of it that was where God's presence was for them. Jerusalem, the temple, and the Holy of Holies within the Temple of Jerusalem was the place that God dwelt on earth. The Bible describes it as this was God's throne room where God was so mighty that just the hem of God's robe would fill the Holy of Holies. Obviously no human structure could contain the full presence of God, but this was their most sacred place where they understood that God was, where they understood that God's promises was understood to be proclaimed. This was their sacred and most holy place. Jerusalem, the temple, the Holy of Holies. Okay. Well, the northern kingdom, Israel, they broke over political and socioeconomical and theological reasons, and somebody slept with somebody's wife and things like that. But eventually, the northern kingdom started to do things a lot differently than the southern kingdom. But then the northern kingdom broke some alliances that had been there a long time, and there was a rising superpower in the world called the Syrians. We know of Assyria today. The Syrians got pissed off and destroyed them, took them over, and that was horrible. And many of the prophets of the Old Testament, like Hosea, Jonah. Jonah probably wasn't really a prophet, but many of the prophets that we read in the Old Testament talk about trying to warn the people of the northern kingdom of Israel that this is going to happen. This is going to happen to you, and be careful. And sure enough, the Syrians destroy the northern kingdom. But Judah didn't break their alliances and wasn't on bad terms with Syria, and so Syria did not destroy the southern kingdom of Judah. In fact, there is some potential history that Judah helped Syria, but the northern kingdom was destroyed. There is no more northern kingdom. And so a long time passes, and another superpower rises in this area of the world. And we know it as the Babylonian Empire. Nebuchadnezzar, Babylon, that area that Abraham first came from over in present-day Iraq and Iran. Babylon develops, becomes a superpower, and they come over, they take over Assyria. They destroy Assyria, and the Assyrian Empire is no more. It's part of Babylon. And Babylon is like, ooh, look at this little Judean countryside. Right here before us, that if we take Judea over, we have a military strategic advantage over Egypt, which would have been the other major superpower in the world at that time that we're well aware of. And so that's exactly what Babylon did. Babylon came in and defeated Judah. But they didn't just destroy everything. They came in, they decimated, they defeated the armies, they you're no longer a country. And what Babylon would do is Babylon would then take the children, the young men and women. They would take the skilled, the educated, and they would take them and they would put them in some other place in the empire. They would take them into what we hear as exile. They did this to control the population that they had just captured. The Assyrians just moved some of their people into the area that they captured and forced marriages and interbred people, so that you were all the same people. You were all Syrians now. And your arranged Syrian wedding, now your child is a Syrian, so you better just cooperate with us. The Babylonians said, we're going to take you from your home and we're going to basically make you slaves in a foreign land where you have no power, you have no connections, you have no family, and you're too afraid, you're too outnumbered to resist. And that's how the Babylonians worked to control the conquered people that they conquered. But Babylon initially did not destroy Jerusalem. They laid siege to it. I mean, that was the last stronghold. Jerusalem is on a high ground. It's a defensible place. And it had walls, and they for years they besieged it. And finally, they took it. And when they took it, they pretty much massacred everybody. And you can also picture in your mind, and as we will hear, as you read some of the other Lamentations, you can picture what it was like during that siege, and what it was like when Babylon broke through the walls, finally took the city. But they also destroyed the temple. And they destroyed the Holy of Holies. In the Holy of Holies was something called the Ark of the Covenant, which had the stone fragments of the Ten Commandments, was considered the throne of God on earth. And it sat in that most holy place. It's lost forever. I mean, that's why Indiana Jones found it in the movies, because it's a historical relic that we have significant historical documentation for through the Bible and other ancient Hebrew writings, that it was something that existed. There's no reason to believe that it didn't exist, but it doesn't exist anymore. We have no idea what the Babylonians did to it. They probably took it. It was gold. It had a lot of gold on it, so they probably took it back and melted it down, realistically, and just threw the chunks of stone that didn't mean anything to them away. But the temple was destroyed. The holiest of holy, most sacred place was defiled. And people were taken from the land that was theirs. That was their promised land from God, was taken away from them, and they were taken to a new place. How do you think they would feel? How do you think they felt?
They were pretty upset.
Upset?
Lost and abandoned, hopeless.
Lost, abandoned, defiled?
I would say very bewildered, because they were an empire and they had so much success for centuries, and now they had nothing to, we call it a Senate investigation. I mean, but basically, I think most of the population couldn't understand why they were defeated. They were really upset.
Yeah. They lost everything. Their home, their understanding as a nation, their understanding as a collective people, their culture, their understanding of their relationship with God and the sacred was all tied to this piece of land and to this city and to this temple. And for centuries, for thousands of years, they had been God's chosen. From when Abraham called them, they had been told that they were called by God, chosen by God. This was their promised land. They were going to be a great nation. They were going to be a blessing to the rest of the world. Okay? Let's just stop and think about what kind of, if you keep hearing that for thousands of years, what kind of attitude might that create as you as a people?
Arrogance.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of, and in fact, that's what a lot of the prophets, like Isaiah and Jeremiah,
Excuse me, what did she say?
she said arrogance.
Yeah, you're arrogant.
I think that would breed a lot of arrogance. And for thousands of years in their culture, they had been told that. We are God's chosen people. We are, and we still get it, there's Jew and there's Gentile. I mean, there's Jew and there's everybody else who's not Jewish is a Gentile. I mean, that, we read that, and, that distinction was significant in that time, in the old, in this time, as well as in the New Testament time. So everything that they had learned as a people was called into question. They had suffered tremendous violence, and those who lived through and survived the siege of Jerusalem had gone through horrible things. I mean, can you think of other examples of this happening in our world?
The Holocaust.
The Holocaust? Yeah.
Like Ukraine.
Ukraine? Yeah, I mean, it's devastating to cultures when these kinds of things happen. Oftentimes you hear a voice can express it. At some level, some of the things that go on is so you can't express it, right? But then someone comes along who has that ability, has an ability to put into words or somehow express that feeling. Okay, of all that's going on and all that has happened that speaks for a people. And that's what we're listening here to, this encounter of the Jewish people. Okay, if you think of the Holocaust, I think of the Diary of Anne Frank. To read, and there's lots of other expressions, but if you to read that, to be able to hear her voice of what she was going through, in many ways is a lament. She was just writing a diary as a young girl of her experience, but that's a lament. So we can have, lamentations can happen in different forms and in different places, and we can have them not just in biblical settings. There are we sometimes need that, a lament to be able to express what collectively as a people or as, even as a person, what we go through. So, as we encounter this, it's good to know a little bit of what's going on, because this what we as biblical scholars and as theologians and as pastors, we describe this as the Babylonian exile, where the southern kingdom of Judea, excuse me, had an almond in my throat, is captured. Jerusalem is destroyed. The people are taken into exile for a generation. Okay, not as long as they were in Egypt, but it absolutely 100% destroyed Jewish understanding. And I shouldn't say Jewish. It destroyed the Judean, the Israelite people understanding of who they were, who God was, and what it meant to be God's people. And those are fundamental cores of culture and identity, right? If you take those away from people, that is traumatic. That is devastating. It's not. You don't do it by accident. Babylon knew what they were doing. Anytime that you see that happening or happened, that was done intentionally to harm. Okay? And there has to be an expression of what you go through. So as we encounter this, something to note is none of this is God speaking. Okay? Every word that is written in the book of Lamentations is human. Okay? This is not the voice of God reaching down and telling someone, I want you to write these words down. It's like how many people think the Bible was written. There are many times in the Bible where God is talking to someone, is speaking to someone who says, say this. This is me speaking. These are my words. And we can hear God speak and share. But this is not the case. Lamentations is a powerful human expression of the pain, of the grief, of the loss, of the trauma of the people who experienced the Babylonian exile.
What is that last word you're saying? Babylonian what?
Exile.
Okay.
Yes,
So
Shani.
when you meant it only lasted a generation, but however, wouldn't you say like maybe 2 or 3 generations? Because the ones that survived, the children, are affected by that, and they were
Oh, they're
able
still
to see
affected by it
so-
today.
So you know,
Yeah.
it's like okay, 3
Well,
divorce.
the actual, and it's somewhere in the neighborhood of like 70 to 80 years that they were actually like in exile. But obviously, yes, the effects of it has lasting trauma, generational trauma, absolutely. But the time in which, Jerusalem was destroyed, between when Jerusalem was destroyed and when it got rebuilt, and the survivors came home and rebuilt and reestablished the kingdom of Judea, was about a little over a generation, of that period of time. But you're absolutely right, Shani. The trauma of that, the effects of it.
The reason why I mentioned that was this morning on the Today Show, they mentioned that there was a hit on Gaza and somewhere, and you could see these children.
Yeah.
And how, one was patched up and how they just didn't even, their facial expression, they didn't have no clue on what was going on.
Oh, right.
It was just.
And they're going to learn, this was just because of an ancient hatred.
Yeah.
And because historically, both the people of Gaza, the Palestinians, and the Israelite people have a claim to that land. They've squabbled over it for thousands of years. Because just like when the people left to go down into Egypt because of a famine, and other people settled there and were established. The Israelite people were in Egypt for 400 some years. I mean, that was a long time that they were slaves in Egypt. When they went back, there were cultures, there were people, there were kingdoms, there were cultures, there were people there that they subjugated, they conquered. And then when they got released from Babylon, there were people there that they had to displace again. So, I mean, the people of Israel are not blameless in this. They're not just the victims, but they're the ones who are voicing some of this lament of what they experienced and what they went through that we can interact with and we can learn from. It's important as we read this that you remember this is all something that people just like us are expressing. This is in my opinion, one of the only books in the Bible. There's another book in the Bible where God's not mentioned, Esther, which is around the same period of time. But this is really the only book in the Bible where God does not have a voice. Even in the story of Esther, where God isn't mentioned, it is very clear that God has a voice in that story. And you can, as you read the book of Esther, you can hear that, and you see very clearly where God is. This is not the case for Lamentation. Okay, and we'll dive deeper into that in a couple of weeks. But I want us to kind of understand why the people were writing this and what they were expressing things about. But I also want us to experience that Lamentations, just like I said, the book of Anne Frank is Lamentation. There's laments all over. If we are willing to listen or to see or recognize, we can hear laments being expressed about things, in they're all over in our modern day media. And I want to share one with you that takes it from a huge cultural level and puts it to a personal level. Okay, so some of you might be familiar with this, or it might be more my generation that might be familiar with this. This is, I'm not going to try to sing, because we're recording this and putting this on YouTube, I can't play this song, but this is a song, I'll read it, as it's also a beautiful poem of lament called Wonderful by the group Everclear. Hey, ain't life wonderful? Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful? Isn't life wonderful now? I close my eyes when I get too sad. I think thoughts that I know are bad. Close my eyes and I count to 10. Hope it's over when I open them. I want the things that I had before, like a Star Wars poster on my bedroom door. I wish I could count to 10 and make everything be wonderful again. Hope my mom and I hope my dad will figure out why they get so mad. Hear them scream, I hear them fight. They say bad words that make me want to cry. I close my eyes when I go to bed and I dream of angels who will make me smile. I feel better when I hear them say, everything will be wonderful someday. Promises mean everything when you're little, and the world's so big. I just don't understand how you can smile with all those tears in your eyes. Tell me everything is wonderful now. Please don't tell me everything is wonderful now. I go to school and I run and play. I tell the kids that it's all okay. I laugh aloud so my friends won't know. When the bell rings, I just don't want to go home. I go to my room and I close my eyes. I make believe that I have a new life. I don't believe you when you say everything will be wonderful someday. Promises mean everything when you're little, and the world is so big. I just don't understand how you can smile with all those tears in your eyes when you tell me everything is wonderful now. No, I don't want to hear you tell me everything is wonderful. I don't want to hear you tell me everything is wonderful. I don't want to hear you say that I'll understand someday. I don't want to hear you say you both have grown in a different way. I don't want to meet your friends. I don't want to start over again. I just want my life to be the same, just like it used to be. Some days I hate everything. I hate everything. Everyone and everything. Please don't tell me everything is wonderful. I don't want to hear you tell me everything is wonderful now. Is that not a lament? Is that not? And the true story is the songwriter, went through a traumatic divorce, parents divorced, and this was able to write, express, but gave voice to a he's a bit older than I am, but generation of where divorce became, exploded, and gave voice to the effects of that to us. So lament is all around us. What I hope we can, as we, starting next week, as we explore that, we're going to explore a little bit of what lament, we'll ask the question, is lament helpful? What is the purpose? Why is it there? And then the following week we'll discuss, wait a minute, where's God in this? And then we'll end with kind of putting it all together. But this is one of my favorite songs of lament out there. If you're familiar with the band Everclear, most of their music is a lament along this line. But I want to challenge you guys to look and be open for lament, and you probably could find something of that is familiar to you. I flipped a coin to either read Wonderful by Everclear or My Hometown by Bruce Springsteen. There are songs, there are books, there are pieces of art, there are other things that express lament, and so just would challenge you, if you're open to it, to bring something, a piece of art, a poem, a song, a picture next week that is a lament that you connect to, that you resonate with. Now I just feel that this song's so powerful, but I did not experience, I blessed them. My parents did not divorce and had a very stable family. But it's still the pain of this song, I feel it, of what this child went through, what the songwriter went through, what kids feel going through this. So if you feel comfortable to share that with the group next week, we can share some other examples of lamentations in our modern society, in our modern world. Okay. So that is what I have for us today. I do encourage you to go ahead and if you haven't done so already, go ahead and read the whole book of Lamentations. It's just 5 poems. I was able to read it in an hour, and I'm actually a slow reader. So you can read it pretty easily. But go ahead and read it. We'll read another lamentation each week that kind of helps us understand what the people of Israel, of Judea, were expressing. So, but thank you all very much for coming and participating. Next week will be a little bit more conversational than me teaching you the history, but we needed to understand where this was coming from for the people.
Excuse me, I have a question. Maybe it comes later, where you said where is God? When the Syrians attacked and destroyed northern Israel, their procedures were to intermarry, and which in effect would eventually, if they were allowed to continue, there would be no Jewish race as such. Then I wonder if God sometimes is up there playing chess. Then along came the Babylonians, who not only destroyed the Syrians, but they destroyed southern Israel. Now, they grabbed Jewish people too, as you mentioned, and put them in different places. But my study of history says that the Babylonians were a little more human. They allowed the Jewish people to continue their religion, and so long as they didn't disobey Babylonian law, they were pretty much left alone. So in a sense, the Jewish race was saved by the Babylonians, believe it or not, or it would have been destroyed by the Syrians. You sometimes think that there's something going on that we have no control over.
Yeah, that is a good observation, John. You're absolutely right. That it allowed, it's called the dysphoria of this taking these people into disparate places, but allowing them to keep their culture and their religious identity intact as long as that didn't cause a problem. And that was the how people tended to be happier. In that, they were still an occupied, oppressed group of people, but they were still able to be who who their claim their cultural and historical,
The Romans must have learned that from the Babylonians.
that is exactly how the Romans operated
That's
as
how
well.
they governed it.
Mm-hmm. Yep, was, and Rome was the most successful one of them. Well, the Muslim Empire was probably the most successful in doing that, but they also didn't allow you to keep, they forced conscription to you. So yeah, good point. All right, well, thank you everyone for coming.
Thank you.
We're gonna put your name tags in